Peter, you led the fight in the Senate to close Vermont Yankee in 2012. Are you confident that the plant will now be closed in 2012, or is there a risk that a new Republican governor might yet renew their license? I assume that as governor you would veto any attempt by the legislature to reverse itself next year.
Well, here's where the contrast between myself and Brian Doobie on Vermont Yankee. You know, I was born and raised in Windham County. That plant, literally was in my backyard all my life. And I have really come to the conclusion that it must be retired on schedule in 2012 for lots of reasons. The first one of which is it's in Vermont's best safety interest to close it in 2012. What's happened is that company's been sold to a company, Entergy Louisiana, that we can't trust. They won't tell us the truth. They're leaking tritium, cobalt, cesium, strontium, highly radioactive substances into the ground in my county under that plant from pipes they told us under oath didn't exist. They want to leave the carcass of the plant on the banks of the Connecticut River for 60 years because they're unwilling to put the $600 million that they promised they would put when they bought the plant in the decommissioning fund, the cleanup fund, to meet their promise of taking it away when it shuts down in 2012. Now that's a company that says they can't afford to put $600 million in the decommissioning fund in the same time that over the last 3 years they've paid their CEO, Wayne Leonard, $350 million so that he can take care of his family. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, this is a company that now is going to be storing high-level nuclear waste on the banks of the Connecticut River for as long as we can see, after we were promised that that high-level waste would never be stored in the state of Vermont. And frankly, the banks of the Connecticut River would never have been chosen as a storage site for high-level nuclear waste. So I feel strongly that the plant's old, that it's tired, that the 5 plants like it have all been decommissioned except for this one, the other 4. Sorry, there were 5 in that unit. It was engineered to be shut down and retired in 2012, and we should stick with the plan. Brian wants to relicense it. His view is that he trusts Entergy Louisiana. I personally feel that that over the last 8 years, the governor and the lieutenant governor have been more interested in protecting the stockholders of Entergy Louisiana than they have been at protecting the people of the state of Vermont. So I will stick with my judgment, and I imagine that Ryan will, if he's elected, relicense an aging nuclear power plant.
Entergy has an enormous amount of money at stake with Vermont Yankee, and the Supreme Court has ruled that they can spend unlimited amounts on political campaigns. Yeah. Did you see any effort by them to influence the outcome of the Democratic primary? And is there still a danger that they may try to buy the election in November?
Well, listen, I understand that I have a target on my back. As the person who, President of the Senate, who led the 26-4 bipartisan vote to close the plant down on schedule, I knew when I made that judgment that they were going to come after me. Of course they're going to put money into this campaign. They're going to put it into the Republican Governors Association, which is already, up there running ads, and you can expect to hear a lot from them. Not directly, they're smarter than that, but they'll trickle the money in through other sources. This is what I know about public service in Vermont. Figure out what's in the best interest of Vermonters. Do the right thing. If you have the courage to do that, I have yet to see an out-of-state corporation try to effectively buy an election in this state. Now, they're going to help Brian in every way possible, but I'm going to say this. Have your pick. A governor who's protecting the shareholders of Entergy Louisiana, a company that didn't tell us the truth under oath, that's leaking highly radioactive substance into the ground, that clearly doesn't care much about Vermonters, or have a governor who's going to stand up for Vermonters, and Vermonters are the smartest voters in the country. I think they'll know which judgment to make by November 2nd. I'm confident they will.
Dr. Richter, this past year we learned that the underground pipes at Vermont Yankee have been leaking radioactive tritium, cesium, cobalt, and strontium, and other radioactive isotopes into the ground near the Connecticut River. As a doctor, can you tell us what the health effects of this may be?
Well, I mean, any form of radiation, again, it depends on your dose and the accumulation of it over time. And it's particularly harmful for developing fetuses. That's really probably one of the biggest things. There's an increased rate of miscarriage, increased rate of stillbirth, depending on, again, we know some of these radiation effects when we look at the meltdown at Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. Those are things over time that they've been able to look at. But we know with radiation, even exposure in general, that the more you have, the higher your risk. Thyroid cancer is another one, certain kinds of bone cancer, because it concentrates in certain areas of the body. So it all depends on the amount. And the fact is if we have an unpredictable amount and we are not told how much is being leaked, this is something is an incredible health concern.
Last time I talked with Peter, we talked about strontium, and I believe that it gets into the teeth and it stays there for 28 years.
That's right.
And the bones, yes.
With strontium in your teeth, so a young child, 28 years later, he may get bone cancer.
Yeah, exactly.
There is no question that that particular radioactive isotope causes leukemia and other cancers. And the scary thing about it is that it attacks young, particularly young living organisms. Now, that happens to be, our planet, children, not to mention other, other mammals and animals. But the challenge for us now is to ask, what do we do about those isotopes that are leaked into the ground? And the story that isn't being told is this. That Vermont Yankee, there were 2 sites for Vermont Yankee at the time that it was sited way back in the 60s when I was a little teeny kid. One was as far from Vermont as we could put it, which happens to be where we ended up. Massachusetts on one side, New Hampshire on the other. We literally filled land into the Connecticut River, which you couldn't do today, to build that plant on a site that we did. It's a very crowded site for one plant and cooled by the waters of the Connecticut River. It's a water-cooled system. The other site was the Lake Champlain. It was going to be in Shelburne. Well, the farthest from Vermont won, for obvious reasons. The point is, because it's a crowded site, those isotopes have leaked under the off-gas system that was built at the plant after the plant was built, as I understand it. In order to dig those out, you'd have to remove those buildings. Those buildings are critical to the operation of the plant. So one of the challenges we have is that while they have removed the isotopes where they can get at them, what they're not telling us much is that the rest of those radioactive isotopes are sitting under those buildings. You can't get at them until you take the buildings away, which of course will happen in decommissioning. The question is, where do those travel between now and then? And that's a question that governors ought to be asking.
When the rain comes down, it goes into the ground and then it seeps into the river, so it carries all this radioactive stuff with it, right? And now it's into the Connecticut River, and it goes on down through Connecticut, and
right.
That was the judgment that was made. Put it as far from Vermont as you can. And, I feel sorry for you. You don't want to live downriver right now. Yes. Vermonters don't. And I often ask this question in Chittenden County. I'm often asked by business leaders, how can you possibly want to close that plant down on schedule in 2012? And I asked a bunch of them recently, I said, I'm going to ask you a question. It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer it. But as you drive home, ask this. Those are my people down there. My relatives, my friends, the people that raised me. If the Shelburne had won for a site, and those isotopes were leaking into Lake Champlain right now, and leaking into the ground in Chittenden County, would you still feel the same way about closing that old plant down in 2012?
And if it were in Shelburne, it goes out into Lake Champlain and then it flows north. So it would go on up to it would be right into Burlington.
It moves a lot slower than it does down the Connecticut River. It would stay right here in Lake Champlain for a long time.
But even after the plant is closed down...
Terry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have to run, but Dr. Deb, you're in great shape, and thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Peter. It was good to have you.
Good to see you.
You can count on my vote.
Thank you.